What's going on out there, ladies and gents? Welcome to Just the Worst podcast. This is episode number 19, to be perfectly precise. And as usual, I'm your host, Billy Donnelly of JoeBlow.com. This is Infamous, and right here at Just the Worst podcast. Last week, did a little bit something different. Paid proper tribute to the late Alan Rickman. So if you didn't get a chance to tune into that show, make sure you check that one out. Thought it was pretty good. And, that one got a little bit emotional, talking about how much Alan Rickman has meant to cinema as a movie lover over his entire career and all the time that we've watched him since he really started in Die Hard. So make sure you check that one out if you haven't. This week going to be a little bit different, a little bit back to business, so to speak, as far as talking about some of the bigger things around the movie industry for this particular episode. And while I do have a pretty loaded docket of stuff that I wanted to touch upon, there is one thing that I really want to start off with and get into and sort of get off my chest, and that's talking about everything that's going on right now surrounding the Academy Awards and the Oscars. The 88th annual Oscar nominations were announced last week. For if you missed out on the discussion for that, make sure you check out Just the Worst Movie Review podcast, episode number 16, where myself and Greg Elwood break down the nominations for the major categories. But the thing that I really wanted to talk about concerning the Academy Awards is sort of this discussion about boycotting the Academy Awards, as well as the lack of diversity that is going into the Academy Awards on a pretty regular basis. Now, I've been monitoring the situation for a while. I wrote a piece up on JoeBlow.com about the boycott and sort of people's feelings on it. And, my impressions of this situation are that, look, it's a difficult thing in a number of ways, because I don't believe that everything that we're talking about has to do with the Academy Awards and the Oscars. Is there a lack of recognition for people of color, or films about people of color or characters of color, or even people on the technical end, minorities and people of color not being nominated, filmmakers not being nominated, screenwriters not being nominated, with this idea that the Oscars are extremely Caucasian, extremely white. Now, for all this talk about people not attending the Oscars and everything that's going into this grand discussion really about race as it pertains to the Oscars, I find that it's not so much about the Oscars as it is about the film industry as a whole. And let me explain. Right now, we're having a big dialogue about diversity in Hollywood. And why is that? Because the Oscars have been made to be the target. Now, is it fair to target the Oscars? I don't know. You can look at the films that people would have liked to see nominated for Academy Awards. Something like Beasts of No Nation, or Creed, or Straight Outta Compton, or Ryan Coogler directing Creed, or Michael B. Jordan in Creed, or Idris Elba in Beasts of No Nation. There are a handful of performances, or of projects, or of displays of storytelling or filmmaking prowess that you could look at and say, man, that was really good. Is it Oscar worthy? I don't know. I'm not a part of the Academy, so it's difficult for me to look at that and say, yes, absolutely. Because let's remember, people will look at movies and say that movie's really good. That doesn't mean the consensus of the Academy views it as an Oscar-worthy picture or performance or demonstration or what have you. So to to look at that and say, well, these films were snubbed or whatnot, art is subjective. So you can't really pinpoint and say that there's some grand Academy conspiracy to leave out any sort of minorities or people of color from the Academy Awards. I don't think that that's the case at all. I don't think people are voting with malicious or racist intentions in their heart. I don't necessarily think that that's how it works. But the Oscars make a dialogue about the lack of diversity in the industry possible. And let me explain that to you a little bit more clearly. If people come out and they just say Hollywood isn't diverse enough, there's not enough blacks or Latinos or Asians or Indians or Native Americans or Portuguese or whatever, there's so much that goes into that the average person just checks out. They just go, I can't pay attention to this. It's too big of a discussion for me to really wrap my head around. I need something simple. And they just go back to doing whatever it is they were doing, and they really don't pay too much attention to the discussion, and they move on with the rest of their life. If you point at the Oscars and you say, Oscars bad, people know the Oscars. They recognize the Oscars. In many cases, they watch the Oscars. So now you've opened up their eyes to the question of, is there a lack of diversity within the Oscars? And from that, you can open the door a little bit further and now start to expand out into the industry. Now, is there a lack of diversity in the nominations of the Academy Awards? Absolutely. But by that same token, I'm not out here on my soapbox trying to say that the Academy should be going out of their way to nominate people of color or minorities or films made by or for or about minorities or people of color. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that the Academy should be looking in some sort of affirmative action type of way to sort of even the playing field. However, with that said, when you get into these discussions about the Oscars and the Academy Awards, and you have films like Creed, films like Straight Outta Compton, films like Beast of No Nation, films like Chirac, that is a very small group of films that represent an unrepresented or underrepresented grouping. And so when those films aren't nominated, when people look at them and they go, oh, look at how good they are, and they're not nominated, that omission, that snub, takes on a whole wealth of other issues coming with it, as opposed to if a film about white characters or performances by white talent or made by white filmmakers or written by white writers are, because when those films don't make the cut, there's just another white whatever to fill the void. Another whitey steps up, so to speak. And that's where people get upset, is because there are so few options that when they aren't recognized, it does feel like a slight. Now, are those feelings of being slighted warranted? I mean, I can't tell somebody how to feel. Once again, this goes to the Academy's voting body and what they deem to be, quote-unquote, Oscar-worthy. But where we really get into some interesting dialogue here is accepting the fact that there just aren't a lot of opportunities for films and filmmakers and actors and costume designers and screenwriters and composers who are people of color to move into a position to be recognized by the Academy. Studios aren't hiring those people for those jobs or investing the money to make those types of films about those types of characters. And that's where the lack of diversity really comes in. Denzel Washington can't be it. Idris Elba can't be it. Viola Davis can't be it. There's more out there. And they're not getting a lot of opportunities in films that aren't quote-unquote black or quote-unquote Hispanic or quote-unquote Asian. Those films aren't being made to give them an opportunity to be in a position to be recognized by the Academy. And that's where the problems really start to set in about how Hollywood works. You know, television for a long time, television operated on a similar level, but television is now caught up because of the fact that they can be risky with their programming and their content. There is so much content on television, and in a number of ways, particularly with cable, there isn't a high demand for grand ratings to justify the cost or the placement on the programming schedule. At a network, your CBS, your NBC, your ABC, there's a little bit more pressure there to do something. But you look at films like Blackish or Empire or Fresh Off the Boat, which are made about minorities and people in color, there is a gravitation towards those programs because they're made very well. People like them. You can have characters on shows, lead characters on shows, who are people of color and minorities. Not everyone has to be white anymore. They don't all have to be filled out with Caucasian casts anymore. At this point, when people watch television, they, in many ways, just want something interesting. They want something that gets at them. That's why shows, and you were talking about shows that are genre shows that in the past wouldn't have done so well, have been pushed by cable, and they have many different colors and creeds and faces involved. Something like a Game of Thrones or Sons of Anarchy or Mad Men or Breaking Bad. Granted, those are shows that are built around white protagonists in many cases, but they are also ensemble pieces that allow them to incorporate a lot of other elements. Now, TV is allowed to have that risk in many ways because of the cost of making the television. Movies at one point in time used to be able to do that, but because there's no longer any real middle class of films, everything is either micro budget or mega budget, the margin for taking such risk has been minimized so greatly that the risk is basically non-existent. You either make something for very little money and hope that you blow it up, or you make something for a ton of money in the hopes that it's $1 billion thing. There are no longer 25, 30, 35, $40 million dramas and comedies being made where you can put cast in that is unproven or is quote-unquote not box office draws. They can't do much of that. Because they're focused with how this will play overseas, how this will play in a certain part of the country, who they can sell this on, who's bankable. And when you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, there's not a lot of leeway for you to say, oh, but let's just try something different for the hell of it. So they play everything close to the vest. They play everything very safe. And what's safe? White people. By their standard, white people are safe. Films about white people are safe. Films about white characters starring white people are safe. Are there people of color or minorities that will break out of that? Sure. But the problem is that when they find one, they want to just use one. They want to cast Kevin Hart in everything. Or The Rock in everything. Or Ice Cube in everything. And rather than continue to find new and interesting and capable talent in seeing what they can do and putting things on their back and hoping that the films carry themselves rather than just the name value, they just go back to the tried and true well. And as a result, it just smothers Hollywood. It smothers opportunity. And you can look at a film such as Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is led by an African American. Actually, he's not African American. He's Afro-British. Led by a black male. Led by a young woman. Right up there is one of the biggest films of all time. So if you have the right film with the right story that engages people and has them coming out, and granted, Star Wars is Star Wars. But needless to say, people weren't saying, I'm not going to watch Star Wars because it stars a black guy and a woman. If anything coming out of that, they said, man, John Boyega was really good in that film. Or, wow, I love Daisy Ridley. And that only happens by taking a chance, by diversifying with characters that aren't required to be a particular race or ethnicity. You know, I get mad when people complain that Michael B. Jordan shouldn't have been Johnny Storm because Johnny Storm was always just a white guy, and oh, how dare they? But you look at some of these roles, and it doesn't really matter who plays them. And I'm not saying that it has to be a black guy or an Asian guy or a Indian woman have to play these characters just for the sake of doing it. But it would be nice to see some fresh faces get some pretty big opportunities. Because let's face it, it's not like there's a lack of talent there. You look at someone like Aziz Ansari, who went to Netflix and made his own comedy show. to call attention to some of these very issues because he couldn't get that opportunity from anywhere else. So he had to just go make his own show. Mindy Kaling got an opportunity to have her own show only after stealing many episodes of The Office. She made the most of her opportunity. The problem is those opportunities are few and far between. And that's why people are pissed. That's why people are pointing at the Oscars. Because the Oscars is an easy focal point for everybody to center their conversation on while opening up the window to talk about all of these other things. And all this week as I've had these conversations, I've gotten these heated conversations with people who refuse to recognize that there's even a problem. How can we move forth with trying to resolve issues when we can't even agree? Find common ground on what the problem is. And this is like a distinctly American type of issue. I know lots of different people overseas in lots of different countries, and even though those countries and the populations of those countries have many differences, there are certain things that they can agree on. The sky is blue, the earth is round. Denying that there's a problem in the movie industry with a lack of diversity is like walking around and telling me that the earth is flat. How am I supposed to engage in any sort of intelligent conversation with you? But people dig in. They get fixated on these one different points. Oh, well now what? You're saying that we should just put black people in the Oscars just to have black guys? No, I'm not. You're saying that as some sort of end of the world doomsday scenario. The Oscars are going to pick who they want to pick. They're going to nominate who they want to nominate. They're going to vote on who they want to vote for. The idea is, though, to have more films that feature actors and actresses and directors and screenwriters and sound technicians and cinematographers who are people of color, who are minorities, so that then when the time comes to nominate, you are picking the very best. But you're doing it in a way that the industry feels inclusive all the time, rather than exclusive. I don't have a problem with who the Oscars nominated. I have a problem with how Hollywood works right now. And who's given the opportunities? Because to deny that there isn't a lack of opportunity for people of color, that there aren't a lot of roles for them, that is just as much part of the problem. And that's my 2 cents on what's going on with the Academy Awards and the Oscars. Alright, let me shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about DC Films and what they got going on over at Warner Brothers as they held a primetime special over on the CW this week called The Dawn of the Justice League. That was meant to sort of be the equivalent of a Marvel sort of announcement to let you know or give you an idea or give you a peek of what DC and Warner Brothers has to come with their phase 1, I guess, in their DC cinematic universe, building towards the Justice League. It, of course, kicks off early this year with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Moves forward with the Suicide Squad, with Wonder Woman, ultimately heading towards, once again, a 2-part Justice League. This special was hosted by Jeff Johns as well as Kevin Smith, who couldn't have been more out of place in this element. Just felt just mugging all over the special, trying to hype it up, but to the point of over-the-top outrageousness. Well, you had Jeff Johns much more grounded, much more reasonable in talking about the projects they had coming on. And look, DC wants to try and make themselves appear as if they're on the same plane as Marvel. And a special like this is perfectly fine in order to try and hype it up. But it all winds up feeling very infomercial-y as you're watching sort of this display of, oh my god, fanboyism that I don't know necessarily matches with what they want to do. Look, I'm going to cut them a break. I'll cut them a little bit of slack because they are still new at this. They're trying to figure it out. They're trying to feel their way through. They're trying to not be Marvel while at the same time being Marvel. And they want to try and draw attention to what they have coming up. The problem with that is that they have to learn how to walk before they learn how to run. They have to learn how to crawl before they learn how to walk. They have to learn how to lay on their belly and lift their head before they can even crawl. They're a baby. DC Films is a baby. And their focus right now needs to be on promoting the shit out of Batman v Superman, getting as many people out there to see it, and having it be as good as it needs to be in order to draw attention and interest into the DC cinematic universe. That's what it all comes down to. They can have these specials all they want, and they can tell you about the Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman and Aquaman and the Flash and Cyborg all they want. But the expansion of the DC cinematic universe does not matter one bit if no one likes Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Not one bit. And right now they insist on putting the cart before the horse and hyping up everything that they have coming in the future, when it all of it, every single last bit of it, is on the shoulders of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. You could announce 9 films, 12 films, 15 films, films for the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 7 years, the next 10 years. None of it matters if nobody likes that first movie. And they still cannot wrap their head around that and understand that. Take a look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Do you know why the Marvel Cinematic Universe works? Because Iron Man was really good and successful. That's why that works. And from there, people became interested in Thor. People became interested in Captain America. People became excited about the possibility of the Avengers. And Ant-Man. And the Guardians of the Galaxy. And now Doctor Strange. And Black Panther. Because of Tony Stark and Iron Man. If Iron Man #1 is not good, There is no Marvel Cinematic Universe because nobody cares. They might go see Captain America as a solo endeavor or Thor as its own thing. But the connective tissue that brings it all together in order to have a shared universe, nobody cares. You can't have a shared universe. You can't build this expansion until you lay the first brick. And the first brick is important. It can't be cracked. It can't be warped. It's got to be rock solid. You can't build a city block until you focus on the first house. You gotta take the first step before you can take step 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that's the problem right now that I see with the DC Cinematic Universe. Is that they're so focused about the long-term future that they're forgetting that they need to get out of the gate first. Get off the ground first. And it's a somewhat uphill climb right at the start because of the fact that people didn't really like Man of Steel. Granted, there are some people who like Man of Steel, but it's not a widespread accepted love for Man of Steel. This is a do-over. Take 2. A second chance and redemption for DC Films and Warner Brothers. And it all starts with Batman v Superman and whether or not the film is any good. Because if it's not, it's the house of cards collapses. It all just falls apart. Crumbles to the ground. You think people are going to come out in droves because Wonder Woman is connected to Batman v Superman if Batman v Superman isn't very good? Then they just look at the whole thing and they go, I don't know about this thing. I mean, you can look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and they're not all winners. There are plenty of films in there that they just do not like. But there was enough goodwill to start. Then even then we have to pay some of it out to make up for Thor 2 or Iron Man 2. Fans will forgive that. They'll look past it because they go, wow, well, but the rest of them are pretty good, so I hope the next one's good. There's a track record. There's some forgiveness there. If you come out and your first 2 films are not very good, doesn't work like that. People go, I'm not going to see this. And then that's where you run into the haters who just want to bitch about it. So you can have a trailer for the Suicide Squad, which doesn't come out until August. Or show off some Wonder Woman footage. Or concept art for Aquaman or The Flash or Cyborg. That's all well and good. But it all starts and ends with the quality of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice and how fans feel about it. They embrace it. They love it. They're excited about it coming out. There you go. They don't. It's over. Star Wars faced a similar predicament where you can come out and say we're going to have a new trilogy, we're going to have episodes 8, we're going to have episodes 9, and we're going to have standalones and spin-offs, and we're going to expand the universe out, we're going to do all these great things. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. If The Force Awakens isn't any good, if people don't like it, because you can't build something upon the prequels. You can't push forward with something when people don't want it, when they reject it. So while you can have as many specials and promo opportunities to try and get a hype going, similar to the Dawn of the Justice League, none of that's going to matter. Unless Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is your Iron Man. Alright, speaking of Star Wars, let me shift gears over to there because we had a little bit of news dealing with the future of the Star Wars universe, or galaxy rather, with a release date change announced by Walt Disney Studios for Star Wars Episode 8. Now, Star Wars Episode 8 was originally scheduled on the calendar for May 26th, 2017, once again bringing Star Wars back into the summer, a May release, as all previous Star Wars episodes and films had been, with the exception of The Force Awakens, and that was something that J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy over at Lucasfilm had to fight for against Disney because of the May tradition. If you remember, the Michael Arndt script that Abrams was working with, there was a lot of questions as to whether or not this was the right approach. And in order to kind of iron out a lot of the details and get it in the right place and shift the way that the story was being told and the emphasis put on certain characters, a lot of work needed to be put in to by Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams to redirect what Michael Arndt had previously done. And with Disney having previously announced a 2015 release date, they were forced to push out of May into December. And believe me, they really didn't want to. Disney really didn't want to. They wanted that May date. In retrospect, the delay probably helped them as best as possible. The Force Awakens is a monster. And why? Because it's not in the summer blockbuster season, which is a bloodbath from week to week. Where just another big budget blockbuster is there. Waiting to take up some box office. You drop in December? Not a lot. There's a lot typically on Christmas Day, but not of this magnitude. The last time we've had films of this nature that were so big were The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings films. Other than that, December is typically reserved for sort of Oscar fare, for prestige films. And with Disney and Lucasfilm cleaning up at the box office with The Force Awakens, it is really no surprise that the decision was made to shift Star Wars Episode 8 from May 26, 2017 to now December 15th, 2017. Which follows on the December release of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, here in 2016. And guess what? When 2018 comes around and we have that sort of young Han Solo, possible Boba Fett standalone. Pretty sure it's going to be a December movie. And when we get Star Wars Episode 9 in 2019, December, get ready for it. Star Wars is now carving out December as its territory. And who the hell is going to get in its way? There's nothing else really out there. And Marvel, which is owned by Disney, is already taking up the summer months. Getting in there in May, in July, and even November in certain instances. And then don't forget, you got Pixar movies that are coming along the way too. So Disney is taking the calendar by storm. With all of their properties, with the potential to be monstrosities at the box office. And I like it. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of Star Wars just dominating the end of the year. Starting out in the middle of December and carrying all the way into January. Giving people an opportunity to see it as many times as they want, as many formats as they want, whether it's IMAX or whether it's regular 2D or whether it's 3D or D-Box or whatever. Because there's nothing else that can compare with Star Wars. That Star Wars will be able to dominate however they want to. But just strictly from a business sense, makes sense for what Disney wants to do. They have one of the biggest movies on the planet and one of the biggest franchises / brands on the planet, or in this case, in the galaxy. Let it have its own season. December is no longer a holiday season or Oscar season. Star Wars season. It makes perfect sense to me. And see, the interesting part about this was that Star Wars can just drop down and say, this is what we're doing. And everybody else has to run. Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One is set to drop on that particular gate. Well, guess what's not going to drop on December 15, 2017 anymore? Ready Player One. Avatar 2 was set to drop a week later almost, on Christmas Day. But guess what? As we're on air right now, The Wrap reports exclusively that Avatar 2 won't be ready for Christmas 2017 anymore. Once again, James Cameron's sequel has been delayed. When is that movie going to be released? As long as with 3 and 4 that they're supposedly be making back to back to back? Who knows? But when it does drop, I bet you it won't be in December anymore. Since Star Wars is going to dominate for the next 4 or 5 years. Everybody just get the hell out of Star Wars' way, I guess. It only makes sense. Stick around, you're only going to get hurt. Or just see opportunity for your box office just dry up right before your very eyes. Doesn't matter what you're shooting for. Who your demographic is. Star Wars demographic is everybody right now. And that's why they're in December. And that's where they're going to keep cleaning up. Alright, one more piece before we get out of here. And this has to do with the Terminator franchise. The follow-up to Terminator Genisys has now been pulled from Paramount's schedule. Stricken from the record for May 19, 2017, with that slot now being occupied by the big screen adaptation of Baywatch, The Rock and Zac Efron. And look, I like the early Terminator films. I think Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day are pretty amazing sci-fi genre fare. And films that really helped make James Cameron. But after that, let's be honest, it all went to shit. Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, it's alright. It's average. Nothing really special about it. Definitely pales in comparison to the first two Terminator films. Terminator Salvation, a prequel. Ugh. That was a mess. A disaster. Which prompted them to have to restart again. Terminator Genisys, that's a pretty terrible movie. I mean, it's awful. Not only is it confusing as hell, it's just not entertaining. Not interesting to watch. Just flat out, downright bad. And the idea that they had a planned trilogy stemming from Terminator Genisys, all that's down to tubes. And this once again goes back to this idea that Hollywood just can't let certain franchises go. Certain franchises, certain series, certain stories, they just end. They're over. There's nothing left to tell. There's nothing left to squeeze from it. There's no juice left in the grape. You got it all out. In your desperate attempts to keep cashing in and finding more money, is quite apparent to the general public who rejects these lesser than films. Who look at them and go, that's no Terminator I want to see. That doesn't look very good. And you know what? They then don't go see it. They stay the hell away from it. So I'm sorry, Terminator. I wish there was a way to make you maybe work. There possibly could be. I just know that it doesn't involve Sarah Connor or John Connor. It involves something else. It doesn't involve Arnold Schwarzenegger as a T-800 unless all the T-800s look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Find another corner of that world to explore. And maybe you got something. But still working off this idea of Sarah and John Connor? Oh, it's so played. And that's why your franchise is dead. So go back to the drawing board. All the way back to the beginning. Square one. See if there's something there. If there's not, leave it alone. Because right now you're doing more harm than good. And that's why Terminator Genisys 2 yanked. Pulled the plug. Dead and buried. And it's a shame. Because I really like Emilia Clarke. But at least we'll always have Khaleesi together. At least we'll always have those dragons. At least we will always have Westeros. And that's my piece for this week. That's the show. Thanks for listening. Make sure you follow all our social media accounts. On Twitter, at JTW Podcast. That's the official Twitter handle of Just the Worst Podcast, at JTW Podcast. You can follow all my musings and stream of consciousness there as well, at Infamous Kid. Facebook, facebook.com/Just the Worst Podcast, as well as my page, facebook.com/Bully the Kid. SoundCloud.com, that's where all of the podcasts can be found. So head over to SoundCloud.com. Do a search for Just the Worst Podcast, and all our various shows and episodes will be right there for your listening pleasure. So make sure you grab hold of that. You never miss one. And home and work on a regular basis. JoeBlow.com. This is Infamous. And right here, my lovely home, Just the Worst Podcast. I'll be back next week talking about some more new things that are up in the industry. Put them in perspective for you. Until then, though, my name is Billy Donnelly. This has been Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 19. See you next week. I'm out. Peace. Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 19, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast Media.